The Mafia boss spoke in whispered Italian, and no one at the hotel understood a word, until the waitress stepped forward and answered him fluently. What she overheard next made her the only person who could save his life, or become his biggest mistake. The marble floors of the Grand Oceana Hotel gleamed under crystal chandeliers, reflecting the hurried movements of guests in expensive suits. Isabella Garcia balanced a silver tray of espresso cups, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. She'd worked here for 3 years, long enough to recognize the difference between actual businessmen and those pretending to be. The man at the reception desk was pretending. She noticed in the moment he walked through the revolving doors. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair slicked back, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, sharp, calculating, scanning the lobby like a predator assessing territory. "Buongiorno," he said to the young receptionist, Michael, who smiled politely but clearly didn't understand. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to the Grand Oceana. Do you have a reservation?" The man's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, lowering his voice.
Ho una prenotazione sotto il nome di Caruso. Ho bisogno di una sala riunioni privata, lontano dalle telecamere.
Michael's smile remained frozen. "I'm sorry, sir, I don't. Could you repeat that in English?" Isabella watched the man's hands curl into fists on the marble counter. Around them, the lobby buzzed with activity. The International Investors Conference had brought nearly 200 guests, and every staff member was stretched thin.
Non parli italiano?
The man's voice rose slightly, frustration bleeding through his careful composure. Several heads turned. This was bad. Isabella had seen enough arguments escalate in hotel lobbies to know when intervention was needed. But something about this particular guest made her hesitate. The way his associates, 3 men who'd entered separately, positioned themselves near the exits. The bulge under the jacket of the tallest one. Still, a scene would be worse. She set down her tray and approached the desk, keeping her voice soft and professional.
Scusi, signore. Posso aiutarla?
The man's head snapped toward her. For a moment, his dark eyes assessed her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then, slowly, deliberately, he straightened. "Finalmente, qualcuno competent," he muttered.
Ho una prenotazione sotto Caruso. Necessito di una sala riunioni che garantisca privacy assoluta. Niente finestre, niente telecamere di sicurezza in vista. È fondamentale.
Isabella's Italian was flawless. Her grandmother had been from Naples, and she'd spent 5 years in Rome during her 20s. She understood every word. She also understood the request was unusual enough to raise questions. A meeting room with no windows. No visible security cameras. Absolute privacy. "Of course, Mr. Caruso," she said in English, turning to Michael. "The gentleman has a reservation under Caruso. He's requesting the Venetian room for a private meeting. He prefers the ambience away from the conference crowds." Michael's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Ah, yes. Mr. Caruso, Suite 714. We have you for 4 nights. The Venetian room is available this evening from 7 to midnight. Will that work?" The man, Caruso, or whatever his real name was, studied Isabella for a long moment.
Sì.
Perfetto, then, switching to accented English. "Thank you. You are very helpful." Something in the way he said helpful felt like a warning and a threat wrapped together. "It's my pleasure, sir. If you need anything during your stay, please don't hesitate to ask." Isabella smiled professionally, but her heart hammered against her ribs. As Caruso moved toward the elevators, one of his associates approached the desk, a younger man with a scar above his left eyebrow. He spoke in rapid Italian to Isabella, ignoring Michael entirely.
Quella sala riunioni è davvero priva di sorveglianza.
Is that meeting room truly free of surveillance? Isabella felt her mouth go dry. "All our rooms have standard security features, sir. But the Venetian room's cameras are positioned discreetly in the corners. They don't directly face the conference table. Many guests prefer it for sensitive business discussions." The man grunted, apparently satisfied, and followed his boss. Michael let out a breath. "Thanks for that. My Italian is basically non-existent. What was that about cameras? He wanted to make sure the room was professional. Isabella lied smoothly. Some investors are paranoid about corporate espionage. Well, thank God you were here. Hey, actually, Michael checked his screen. Since you speak Italian, could you handle their dinner service tonight? They specifically requested Italian-speaking staff for the Venetian room. There's a premium service fee attached. Isabella hesitated. Every instinct screamed to refuse. But she thought of her rent, due in 5 days. The medical bills from her mother's hospital stay last month. The car that desperately needed new brakes. Sure, she heard herself say. I'll take it. Great. 7 p.m., Venetian room. Full dinner service for 6 guests. As Isabella returned to her station, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a terrible mistake. She glanced toward the elevators where Caruso had disappeared. Through the glass walls, she could see him on his phone, speaking animatedly, his free hand gesturing sharply. Her phone buzzed, a text from her roommate about the rent. Isabella closed her eyes, steeling herself. It's just one dinner service. What's the worst that could happen? She would remember that thought later, when everything fell apart. That evening, as Isabella prepared the Venetian room with fresh linens and wine glasses, she noticed something odd. Someone had already been in the room. A small black device, no bigger than a thumb drive, was wedged behind the ornamental mirror. She almost missed it. A listening device. Isabella's blood ran cold. She left it exactly where it was, her hands shaking as she arranged the silverware. At 6:55 p.m., she stood outside the Venetian room doors, smoothing her apron, trying to calm her racing pulse. The real mystery was just beginning, and she was standing right at its center. The Venetian room lived up to its name: deep burgundy walls, gold-trimmed mirrors, and a chandelier that cast warm amber light across the private dining table. Isabella had served hundreds of meals in this room, but tonight felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. Don Romano, she'd heard one of the men call him that, not Caruso, sat at the head of the table. 5 other men surrounded him, all wearing expensive watches and forced smiles. Isabella recognized the performance. She'd seen it before in her time in Rome, when her ex-boyfriend had dragged her to dinners with his business associates, men who spoke in metaphors and never quite said what they meant. Il vino, signorina, Romano said without looking at her. Isabella poured the Barolo carefully, moving clockwise around the table. The men continued their conversation as if she were furniture. The shipment from Marseille, the scarred man said in Italian. It arrives Thursday. The Portuguese contact confirmed. Good, Romano swirled his wine. And the meeting with the Russians? Friday morning. The yacht, as planned, this from an older man with silver hair, distinguished, almost grandfatherly. A celebration of our new partnership. Isabella's hands remained steady as she poured, but her mind raced. Shipments. Russians. A yacht meeting. None of this sounded like legitimate business. Lorenzo vouches for them? Romano asked. Of course, Don Romano. Lorenzo arranged everything personally, the silver-haired man smiled. He knows how important this expansion is to you. Isabella retreated to the corner, her back against the wall, hands folded. Invisible. That was the trick. Make yourself so unremarkable they forget you understand every word. Your pasta, gentlemen. She served the primi piatti, moving efficiently between kitchen and dining room. Each trip took her past the ornamental mirror where she'd spotted the listening device.
Who had planted it?
Hotel security? Police? Or someone else? On her 3rd trip to the kitchen, Isabella paused in the service hallway. Through the door, she could hear their voices more clearly. Someone had raised the volume. He's getting old, a voice said. Not the silver-haired man, someone younger. Sentimental. The Romano we knew would never have hesitated in Naples. Careful, Marco, that was the scarred man. You speak of Don Romano. I speak the truth. This Russian deal, it's his last chance to prove he still has the stomach for real business. If he shows weakness. Enough, the silver-haired man's voice cut through. Tomorrow on the yacht, we'll see what he's made of. Away from his usual guards, away from witnesses. Just us and the sea. Isabella's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. And if he refuses the terms? Marco again. Then the Russians will find new partners. Partners who understand that loyalty has limits. A pause. Lorenzo agrees. He's already positioning himself. Lorenzo betrays his own boss. Lorenzo thinks of the future. Romano's time is ending. Better to stand with the rising sun than the setting 1 inch. Isabella's mind spun. They were planning something on that yacht. Something final. And Lorenzo, whoever he was, had already switched sides. She pushed through the kitchen door, forcing her expression neutral.
Secondo piatto, signori.
The braised lamb was met with appreciative murmurs. Romano caught her eye as she served him, and for a heartbeat, she thought he knew. That somehow he'd seen through her careful mask and recognized that she understood everything. But he only nodded, dismissing her with a gesture. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of courses and coded conversation. Isabella learned that Lorenzo was Romano's right-hand man, currently in Milan but returning tomorrow. That the yacht trip was scheduled for 9 a.m., departing from the marina just 2 kilometers from the hotel. That Romano trusted these men completely, trusted them enough to board a boat with them, far from shore, far from help. At 11:30 p.m., the dinner finally ended. Isabella cleared plates with mechanical precision, her mind screaming at her to do something, say something. But what? Walk up to a Mafia boss and tell him his associates were plotting against him? Based on a conversation in Italian that she wasn't supposed to understand. Signorina, Romano's voice stopped her at the door. He stood alone now, the others having filtered out. Your name? Isabella, sir. Isabella Garcia. Garcia. Spanish. My father. My mother's Italian. From Naples. Something flickered in his eyes. Interest, or perhaps suspicion. You speak beautifully. Where did you learn? I lived in Rome for 5 years, sir. She kept her voice steady, professional. Near Trastevere. Trastevere, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. A beautiful neighborhood. Full of artists and dreamers. He stepped closer. And secrets. Everyone in Trastevere has secrets, no. Isabella's throat tightened. I couldn't say, sir. Will there be anything else? Romano studied her for a long moment, then shook his head.
No.
Buonanotte, Isabella Garcia. She left quickly, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must hear it. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. A man was going to die tomorrow. A dangerous man. Yes, probably a terrible man. But still. And she was the only person who knew. Isabella didn't sleep. She sat on her apartment balcony until dawn, chain-drinking coffee and replaying the dinner conversation in her mind. Every instinct told her to stay out of it. Let dangerous men handle their dangerous business. She was a waitress, not a hero. But her grandmother's voice haunted her. Quando vedi il male e non fai niente, diveni complice. When you see evil and do nothing, you become complicit. At 6 a.m., Isabella showered, dressed in her uniform, and drove to the hotel with shaking hands. She had no plan. No idea what she was going to say, or even if she'd say anything at all. The morning shift in the hotel kitchen was chaos. Breakfast orders for 200 conference guests, half the staff calling in sick, and the head chef screaming at anyone within earshot. Isabella moved through it mechanically, arranging pastries, brewing coffee, her mind 1,000 miles away. At 7:30, she saw him. Romano sat alone in the breakfast alcove near the kitchen entrance, reading a newspaper. His associates were nowhere in sight. He wore casual clothes, linen pants, a white shirt, looking like any other wealthy guest enjoying his morning espresso. This was her chance. Possibly her only chance. Isabella's hands trembled as she prepared a fresh coffee pot. She approached his table, her heart hammering so violently she thought she might faint. More coffee, sir? She asked in English. He glanced up, recognition flickering across his face. Ah, Isabella from Naples. Yes, please. She poured carefully, then lowered her voice to barely a whisper, switching to Italian. Signore, I must tell you something. Last night, His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with shocking strength. Coffee spilled across the white tablecloth. Romano's eyes turned glacial. You what? He hissed in Italian, pulling her closer. You were listening? Who do you work for? No one. I swear, Isabella's voice cracked with genuine terror. Please, you're hurting me. Who sent you? The Calabrians? The French. His grip tightened. Around them, a few guests glanced over, curious. I work here. I'm just a waitress. Tears stung her eyes, partly from pain, partly from fear. Please, I heard something last night, something about the yacht, about your friends, they're not. Romano's expression shifted, and for a moment, she saw something dangerous and calculating behind his eyes. Then, suddenly, he noticed her fear. Real, unfeigned terror. She wasn't an operative or a spy, she was a girl in over her head, shaking like a leaf. He released her wrist abruptly. Isabella stumbled backward, cradling her arm. Red marks bloomed on her skin where his fingers had been. She should run. Every cell in her body screamed at her to run. But she stayed. Your friends, she whispered urgently in Italian. They're not your friends. Last night, they talked about the yacht trip. About Lorenzo. She swallowed hard. About you showing weakness. About new partnerships. They said things, signore. Dangerous things. Romano's face had gone completely still. What exactly did they say? Isabella glanced around. The breakfast alcove was filling up with guests. This was madness, having this conversation here, now, in the open. Not here, she said. Please. Meet me in the service corridor behind the kitchen in 10 minutes. The one near the loading dock. No cameras. Why should I trust you? Because if I worked for your enemies, I wouldn't warn you. I'd let you get on that yacht, she met his eyes. 10 minutes. Then I've done my duty to my grandmother's memory, and you can do whatever you want. She walked away before he could respond, her legs barely supporting her. In the kitchen, she ducked into the staff bathroom and vomited into the toilet, adrenaline and fear overwhelming her system. What have I done? What have I done? But it was done now. She'd crossed a line she could never uncross. 9 minutes later, Isabella stood in the dim service corridor, surrounded by stacked linens and cleaning supplies. The loading dock door was propped open, letting in the morning breeze and the distant sound of seagulls. She heard footsteps. Romano emerged from the shadows, alone. Talk, he said simply. Isabella told him everything. The conversation about the yacht, about Lorenzo's betrayal, about standing with the rising sun. She spoke quickly, quietly, watching his face shift from skepticism to something harder, darker. When she finished, Romano was silent for a long moment. Lorenzo, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. My Lorenzo. 20 years together. I'm sorry, Isabella said, and meant it. Romano looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Why tell me? Why risk this? Because my grandmother taught me that silence makes you guilty. Isabella touched the bruises on her wrist. And because no one deserves to die in a trap, not even, she stopped herself. Not even a monster like me? Romano finished, with a bitter smile. Isabella said nothing. Romano nodded slowly, then turned toward the loading dock exit. Stay away from me, Isabella Garcia. Forget this conversation. Forget you ever saw me. The yacht is my problem now. Not yours, he paused at the door. Go home. Call in sick. Don't come back to this hotel until I'm gone. Then he disappeared into the morning light, leaving Isabella alone in the corridor, wondering if she'd just saved a man's life or sealed her own fate. Isabella did not call in sick. She told herself it was because she couldn't afford to lose a day's pay. That her rent was due, her car needed repairs, her mother's medication wasn't going to pay for itself. But as she drove to the hotel the next morning, day 3, she knew the truth. She needed to know if Romano would survive. The morning shift dragged endlessly. Isabella cleaned tables, served breakfast, smiled at guests, all while her mind spun with dark possibilities. At 8:45 a.m., she saw them, Romano and his 5 associates, walking through the lobby toward the front entrance, dressed in casual yacht attire. Romano wore sunglasses, his expression unreadable. He didn't glance in her direction, didn't acknowledge her existence. The scarred man laughed at something Marco said. The silver-haired man clapped Romano on the shoulder like an old friend. They looked exactly like a group of wealthy businessmen heading out for a pleasure cruise. Isabella's stomach twisted. Was Romano walking into the trap knowingly? Had he even believed her warning? At 9:15 a.m., she made a decision that would change everything. "Maria," she said to the head waitress, "I'm feeling sick. Can I take a break?"
Now?
During breakfast rush, Maria frowned, but saw something in Isabella's face.
Fine.
30 minutes, no more. Isabella grabbed her bag and ran. The marina was a 15-minute drive, but she made it in 10, her aging Honda protesting every acceleration. She parked haphazardly near the harbor master's office and rushed toward the docks, her eyes scanning the rows of boats. There, a sleek white yacht, maybe 60 feet long, pulling away from the pier. She could see figures on the deck. 6 men. One of them was Romano. Isabella's heart sank. She was too late. The yacht was already 50 meters from the dock, heading toward open water. "Can I help you, miss?" An older man in a harbor patrol uniform approached. "That yacht, the white one, do you know who chartered it?" "Private charter. Left about 5 minutes ago," he squinted at her. "Why?" "Because dangerous men are about to murder someone." She wanted to scream. But instead she said, "I think they forgot something. A client of mine from the hotel. Well, they're gone now. Won't be back until this afternoon, I'd imagine." Isabella watched the yacht grow smaller, her mind racing. What could she do? Call the police? And tell them what? That she'd overheard a conversation in Italian about a vague plan? That she suspected something might happen? They'd laugh her out of the station. She walked along the pier, feeling helpless and stupid. Why had she come here? What did she think she could do? Then she saw it, a small rigid inflatable boat tied to a maintenance dock, with Harbor Patrol stenciled on the side. Next to it, a radio handset sat on an equipment crate, crackling with occasional static transmissions. Isabella looked around. The Harbor Patrol officer had walked back toward his office. The marina was quiet. Most boats were already out, taking advantage of the perfect weather. She shouldn't. This was insane. She grabbed the radio. Her hands shook as she turned it to the emergency channel, the same one she'd heard crackling in the background during last night's dinner when one of Romano's men had taken a call. She'd recognized the distinctive squelch pattern. Isabella closed her eyes, remembering every Italian crime drama she'd watched with her grandmother. Every phrase she'd overheard in Rome from men who lived in shadows. She pressed the transmit button and spoke in rapid Italian, pitching her voice lower, more masculine. Codice Rosso.
Porto compromesso. Ripetere. Porto compromesso. Squadra in posizione.
Over. Code red. Harbor compromised. Repeat. Harbor compromised. Team in position. She released the button, her heart hammering. Static crackled back. Then nothing. Had anyone heard? Did it matter? Isabella was about to try again, when movement on the yacht caught her eye. Even from this distance, she could see sudden activity on the deck. Figures moving quickly, urgently. The yacht's engines changed pitch. Then she saw it a struggle. 2 men grappling near the railing. One of them was Romano. She recognized his white shirt. Another man joined the fight. Then another. They were attacking him. Right now, in broad daylight, on open water.
Nu, Isabella Vispere.
Romano disappeared from view, pulled below deck. The yacht continued moving, but erratically now, as if no one was properly at the helm. Isabella raised the radio again, her voice desperate. Emergenza.
Codice nero.
Richie dear, rinforzi immediati. Coordinate. She glanced at the harbor GPS display on the crate.
Nord-est, 3 chilometri dalla costa.
Emergency.
Code black.
Requesting immediate reinforcements. More static. Then, a different voice, sharp and questioning. Identification.
Chi parla?
Someone was demanding identification. Someone official sounding. Isabella's blood ran cold. She just broadcast on what might be an actual emergency channel. The harbor patrol would investigate. Police might already be on their way. But none of that mattered if Romano was dead before they arrived. On the yacht, a figure suddenly emerged on deck. Romano, bloodied, fighting off 2 men. He was alive, still fighting. Isabella watched, helpless, as Romano managed to throw one attacker against the railing. The man tumbled overboard with a distant splash, but 3 others were on Romano now, dragging him back down. The radio crackled again. Unita en rata.
Tempo stimato, 7 minuti. Units en route.
Estimated time, 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Romano had to survive 7 more minutes. Isabella didn't know if her fake broadcast had done anything, or if she'd just made everything infinitely worse. But as she watched the yacht drift in the sparkling morning sea, she knew one thing with certainty.
She was in this now.
Completely, irrevocably in this. And there was no going back. Isabella did not call in sick. She told herself it was because she couldn't afford to lose a day's pay. That her rent was due, her car needed repairs, her mother's medication wasn't going to pay for itself. But as she drove to the hotel the next morning, day 3, she knew the truth. She needed to know if Romano would survive. The morning's shift dragged endlessly. Isabella cleaned tables, served breakfast, smiled at guests, all while her mind spun with dark possibilities. At 8:45 a.m., she saw them, Romano and his 5 associates, walking through the lobby toward the front entrance, dressed in casual yacht attire. Romano wore sunglasses, his expression unreadable. He didn't glance in her direction, didn't acknowledge her existence. The scarred man laughed at something Marco said. The silver-haired man clapped Romano on the shoulder like an old friend. They looked exactly like a group of wealthy businessmen heading out for a pleasure cruise. Isabella's stomach twisted. Was Romano walking into the trap knowingly? Had he even believed her warning? At 9:15 a.m., she made a decision that would change everything. "Maria," she said to the head waitress, "I'm feeling sick. Can I take a break? Now?" During breakfast rush, Maria frowned, but saw something in Isabella's face.
Fine.
30 minutes, no more. Isabella grabbed her bag and ran. The marina was a 15-minute drive, but she made it in 10, her aging Honda protesting every acceleration. She parked haphazardly near the harbor master's office and rushed toward the docks, her eyes scanning the rows of boats. There, a sleek white yacht, maybe 60 feet long, pulling away from the pier. She could see figures on the deck.
6 men.
One of them was Romano. Isabella's heart sank. She was too late. The yacht was already 50 meters from the dock, heading toward open water. "Can I help you, miss?" An older man in a harbor patrol uniform approached. "That yacht, the white one, do you know who chartered it?" "Private charter. Left about 5 minutes ago," he squinted at her.
"Why?"
"Because dangerous men are about to murder someone." She wanted to scream, but instead she said, "I think they forgot something. A client of mine from the hotel. Well, they're gone now. Won't be back until this afternoon, I'd imagine." Isabella watched the yacht grow smaller, her mind racing. What could she do? Call the police? And tell them what? That she'd overheard a conversation in Italian about a vague plan? That she suspected something might happen? They'd laugh her out of the station. She walked along the pier, feeling helpless and stupid. Why had she come here? What did she think she could do? Then she saw it, a small, rigid, inflatable boat tied to a maintenance dock, with Harbor Patrol stenciled on the side. Next to it, a radio handset sat on an equipment crate, crackling with occasional static transmissions. Isabella looked around. The Harbor Patrol officer had walked back toward his office. The marina was quiet. Most boats were already out, taking advantage of the perfect weather.
She shouldn't.
This was insane. She grabbed the radio. Her hands shook as she turned it to the emergency channel, the same one she'd heard crackling in the background during last night's dinner when one of Romano's men had taken a call. She'd recognized the distinctive squelch pattern. Isabella closed her eyes, remembering every Italian crime drama she'd watched with her grandmother. Every phrase she'd overheard in Rome from men who lived in shadows. She pressed the transmit button and spoke in rapid Italian, pitching her voice lower, more masculine. Codice Rosso.
Porto compromesso. Ripeteri, porto compromesso. Squadra in posizione.
Over.
Code red. Harbor compromised.
Repeat. Harbor compromised. Team in position. She released the button, her heart hammering. Static crackled back. Then nothing. Had anyone heard? Did it matter? Isabella was about to try again when movement on the yacht caught her eye. Even from this distance, she could see sudden activity on the deck. Figures moving quickly, urgently. The yacht's engines changed pitch. Then she saw it, a struggle. Two men grappling near the railing. One of them was Romano. She recognized his white shirt. Another man joined the fight. Then another. They were attacking him, right now, in broad daylight, on open water.
No, Isabella whispered.
Romano disappeared from view, pulled below deck. The yacht continued moving, but erratically now, as if no one was properly at the helm. Isabella raised the radio again, her voice desperate. Emergenza.
Codice nero.
Ricci dir rinforzi immediati. Coordinate. She glanced at the harbor GPS display on the crate.
Nord-est, 3 chilometri dalla costa.
Emergency.
Code black.
Requesting immediate reinforcements. More static. Then, a different voice, sharp and questioning. Identification.
Chi parla?
Someone was demanding identification. Someone official sounding. Isabella's blood ran cold. She'd just broadcast on what might be an actual emergency channel. The Harbor Patrol would investigate. Police might already be on their way. But none of that mattered if Romano was dead before they arrived. On the yacht, a figure suddenly emerged on deck. Romano, bloodied, fighting off two men. He was alive. Still fighting. Isabella watched, helpless, as Romano managed to throw one attacker against the railing. The man tumbled overboard with a distant splash, but three others were on Romano now, dragging him back down. The radio crackled again. Unita en rata.
Tempo stimato, 7 minuti. Units en route.
Estimated time, 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Romano had to survive 7 more minutes. Isabella didn't know if her fake broadcast had done anything, or if she'd just made everything infinitely worse. But as she watched the yacht drift in the sparkling morning sea, she knew one thing with certainty.
She was in this now.
Completely, irrevocably in this. And there was no going back. The Coast Guard didn't arrest them. That was Isabella's first surprise. When the officers boarded the yacht, they found 2 unconscious men, a bleeding Romano claiming self-defense, and a terrified waitress in a stolen patrol boat who swore she'd only been trying to help. The second surprise came when Romano's lawyer arrived, a sharp woman in a designer suit who somehow produced paperwork proving the yacht charter was legitimate, that the 2 unconscious men had criminal warrants, and that Romano was actually assisting with an ongoing investigation.
How?
Isabella whispered as they stood on the dock 3 hours later, giving their final statements. Money and connections, Romano replied quietly. The currency of survival. By sunset, they were officially released. Marco and the scarred man were taken into custody. The silver-haired man and his companion had vanished, their emergency raft found empty, drifting 2 kilometers north. "They'll come back for you," Isabella said as they walked toward the parking lot. Her shift at the hotel seemed like a lifetime ago. "I know," Romano pulled out his phone, made a call in rapid Italian, then hung up. "Which is why you're coming with me."
What? No.
"I'm going home, taking a very long shower, and pretending this day never happened." Romano gripped her arm, not roughly like before, but firmly. "Isabella, listen to me carefully. You broadcast coded cartel phrases on an open radio channel. You were seen helping me. By now, Lorenzo knows everything. He knows you're the one who warned me." The blood drained from Isabella's face. "But I'm nobody. I'm just. You're a witness. You're leverage. You're a loose end." Romano's dark eyes held hers. "And Lorenzo doesn't leave loose ends." Isabella's knees felt weak. "This can't be happening." "It is happening. So you have 2 choices. Come with me to somewhere safe, or go home and hope Lorenzo's people don't find you before tomorrow." He paused. "Your choice. But choose quickly." Isabella thought of her small apartment, her roommate, her predictable life. Then she thought of the silver-haired man's cold eyes, the casual way they'd planned Romano's death. "Where?" she asked. "Somewhere they won't look." The warehouse sat on an abandoned stretch of coastline, 30 kilometers north of the city. Rusted corrugated metal walls, broken windows, the smell of salt and decay. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Inside was different. A corner had been converted into a makeshift safe room, generator-powered lights, a table covered with maps and phones, 2 chairs, supplies stacked against the wall. A hideout prepared for exactly this kind of emergency. "You've done this before," Isabella said, her voice hollow. Many times. Romano collapsed into a chair, wincing. Now that the adrenaline had faded, his injuries were catching up with him. Blood had soaked through his shirt from a knife wound below his ribs. "You're hurt." Isabella moved without thinking, reaching for the first aid kit she'd spotted on a shelf. "I've had worse." "That's not reassuring." She opened the kit, pulling out gauze and antiseptic. "Shirt off." Romano raised an eyebrow but complied. The wound was deep but clean, a glancing blow that had missed anything vital. Isabella had seen enough injuries growing up in a coastal town to know what needed stitches and what didn't. This didn't.
Barely.
"You're good at this," Romano observed as she cleaned the wound. "My father was a fisherman. Accidents happened." She worked methodically, hands steady despite her racing heart. "Tell me about Lorenzo."
"Why?"
"Because if I'm going to be a target, I deserve to know who wants me dead." Romano was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old betrayal. "Lorenzo was my brother. Not by blood, by choice. 20 years ago, I pulled him out of a gutter in Palermo. Gave him purpose, family, a future." He laughed bitterly. "And this is how he repays me." "People change. People become who they always were." "I was just too blind to see it." Romano watched as Isabella wrapped bandages around his torso. "He's ambitious. Ruthless. He saw weakness in me and decided to take what he thought I could no longer hold." "What weakness?" Romano's jaw tightened. "I told him I wanted out. Last year, after my daughter's wedding, I told him I was tired of the violence. That I wanted to retire, pass things on peacefully." He shook his head. "In our world, wanting peace is the same as showing your throat." Isabella secured the bandage and sat back. "Your daughter doesn't know what you do. She thinks I'm an import-export." "Which isn't entirely a lie." Romano met her eyes. "I'm not a good man, Isabella. I've done terrible things. But I've never killed anyone who didn't pose a direct threat to me or mine. That's the line I drew. Lorenzo has no lines." Isabella thought about that, about moral gradations in a world of darkness. "The messages," she said suddenly. "You said Lorenzo is coordinating with someone. If we can intercept his communications."
"We."
Romano looked at her with something like respect. 5 hours ago you were serving breakfast. 5 hours ago I wasn't hunted by the Mafia." Isabella stood, pacing the small space. If Lorenzo is planning something big, something that requires meeting with foreign backers, there has to be communication. Emails, phone calls, something we can trace. Romano pulled a burner phone from his pocket and tossed it to her. His emergency contact number. He doesn't know I have it. But the messages are coded, and my Italian isn't, he paused. Actually, that's not true. My Italian is perfect. But these codes are specific to certain families, certain regions. Your grandmother was from Naples. Yes. Then you might recognize the old phrases. The traditional codes he powered on the phone. If you can decode his messages, we can figure out where he'll be, who he's meeting, and when. Isabella caught the phone, her hands trembling slightly. This is insane. Yes. I could die. Yes. But if we don't do this, Lorenzo wins. And more people die. Now you understand, Romano stood slowly, wincing. Welcome to my world, Isabella Garcia. I'm sorry you're here. But I'm grateful you're not facing it alone. Isabella looked at the phone, then at Romano, then at the dark warehouse around them. Somewhere out there, Lorenzo was planning his next move. And somehow, impossibly, she'd become the only person who could help stop him. She opened the phone and began scrolling through messages, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory, teaching her the old Neapolitan phrases. The hunt for the truth had begun. For 2 days, they lived like ghosts in the warehouse. Isabella decoded message after message, her eyes burning from staring at the small phone screen. Romano made calls to his few remaining loyal contacts, trying to map the scope of Lorenzo's betrayal. They survived on canned food and bitter coffee, sleeping in shifts, always listening for approaching vehicles. On the morning of day 5, Isabella found it. Here, she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. This message from 3 days ago.
Il falco incontra gli aquiloni dove il sole tramonta sul mare.
Romano looked up from his map. The falcon meets the kites where the sun sets on the sea. Poetic, but meaningless. Not if you know Neapolitan old code. Isabella's fingers flew across her phone, pulling up a map. Falco, that's Lorenzo's childhood nickname. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old families. Falco always refers to someone from the Esposito line. And aquiloni, kites, that's code for foreign investors. Eastern European, specifically. The Russians, Romano said quietly.
Yes.
And where the sun sets on the sea, there's only one restaurant on this coastline famous for sunset views. Cielo Rosso, the cliffside place up in the mountains. 40 kilometers north, she looked up, eyes bright with discovery. He's meeting them there. Romano was already moving, pulling a clean shirt from his supplies. When? Isabella scrolled further. Today. 7 p.m. It says Quando lo stelle appaiono. When the stars appear. That's sunset. That's in 9 hours. Romano checked his watch, then his gun. A detail Isabella tried not to focus on. He'll have security. At least 4 men. Probably more. So, what do we do? Call the police? And tell them what? That I suspect my business partner is meeting with foreign criminals. Romano shook his head. Lorenzo owns half the local police. By the time we convince someone to investigate, he'd be gone. No, we need proof. We need him to confess in front of those backers, make them see he's unreliable. How do we do that?
Romano smiled grimly.
You're going to help me crash a very exclusive dinner party. Cielo Rosso perched on a cliff edge like a crown jewel, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Mediterranean. The restaurant's reputation for privacy and discretion made it perfect for exactly these kinds of meetings. Isabella's hands shook as she adjusted the server's uniform Romano had somehow procured. They'd parked 2 kilometers away and hiked up through the service road, avoiding the main entrance where Lorenzo's security would be watching. I can't do this, she whispered as they crouched near the kitchen entrance. I'm not trained for this. I'm just the woman who stole a patrol boat and impersonated a Coast Guard commander? Romano raised an eyebrow. You're braver than you think, Isabella. That was adrenaline and stupidity. Same thing in my experience. He checked his phone. 6:47 p.m. They'll be arriving soon. Remember the plan? Isabella nodded, though her throat felt too tight to speak. The plan was simple. She'd go in as a server, gain access to Lorenzo's private dining room, and signal Romano when the moment was right. Romano would confront Lorenzo in front of the Russian backers, expose his betrayal, and hope the backers valued stability over ambition.
It was a terrible plan,
But it was the only one they had. If anything goes wrong, Romano said quietly, run. Don't look back, don't try to help. Just run.
Romano.
Promise me. Isabella met his eyes and lied. I promise. He knew she was lying. She could see it in his face. But he nodded anyway and disappeared into the shadows to circle around to the main entrance. Isabella took a deep breath and walked into the kitchen. The dinner service was already underway, wealthy guests enjoying the sunset, unaware of the dangerous meeting about to take place in the private room upstairs. Isabella grabbed a tray of wine glasses and headed for the service elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs. The private dining room was elegant, candlelit, intimate, with those famous windows overlooking the darkening sea. And there, at the head of the table, sat Lorenzo. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. 3 men sat with him, severe faces, expensive suits, Eastern European accents as they spoke in low tones. Finally, Lorenzo said in Italian as Isabella entered. The wine. I was beginning to think your service matched your location, remote and slow. Isabella kept her eyes down, playing the submissive server. My apologies, signore. The vintage you requested. I don't care about excuses, Lorenzo waved dismissively. Pour and leave. She moved around the table, filling glasses with trembling hands. The Russians watched her with predatory interest, making her skin crawl. This Romano problem, one of the Russians said. You're certain it's handled? Dead, Lorenzo replied casually, swirling his wine. Lost at sea 3 days ago. A tragic accident during a business trip. By the time anyone questions it, I'll have consolidated control over all his operations. And his loyal associates. Buying them or burying them. Your choice of phrase, Lorenzo smiled. The organization is mine now. Which means your investment is secured with someone who actually has the vision to expand properly. Isabella's hands shook as she poured the last glass. She'd heard enough. She needed to signal Romano now. But as she turned to leave, Lorenzo's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went completely white. Impossible, he whispered. What? The Russian demanded. Lorenzo held up his phone, showing a message. Someone just used Romano's personal code. From inside this restaurant. The room went deathly silent. Lorenzo's eyes snapped to Isabella, and she saw the recognition dawn. You're the waitress from the hotel. The one who speaks Italian. Isabella's blood turned to ice. Grab her, Lorenzo shouted. But Isabella was already moving, dropping the tray with a crash and sprinting for the door. She heard chairs scraping, heavy footsteps behind her, shouts in Italian and Russian. She burst into the main dining room, and there, standing by the entrance with 2 men she recognized as his loyal guards, was Romano. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant. Now, Isabella screamed. Romano moved like lightning. His guards blocked the stairway as Lorenzo and the Russians poured out of the private room. In the chaos, Romano strode forward, his voice cutting through the noise. Lorenzo, he called out. Surprised to see me? You should be. Dead men make terrible dinner guests. Lorenzo froze, his face a mask of shock and rage. Around them, restaurant patrons gasped and whispered. And Isabella realized this was it. The moment everything either fell apart or fell into place. The confrontation had begun. The restaurant descended into chaos. Lorenzo's hand moved toward his jacket, but Romano's guards were faster, their weapons drawn and aimed. The Russian backers stepped away from Lorenzo, hands raised, their expressions shifting from confusion to calculation. Don Romano, the eldest Russian said slowly, his accent thick. We were told you were dead. As you can see, Mikhail, the reports were greatly exaggerated. Romano stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his injuries. But my associate Lorenzo here was hoping they'd become true. Weren't you, Fratello? Lorenzo's face twisted with rage, and something else. Desperation.
You don't understand.
You've become weak, Romano. Sentimental. The organization needs. Needs what? A man who murders his own boss for profit. Romano's voice was cold steel. Tell them, Lorenzo. Tell these gentlemen how you orchestrated my death. How you planted men on that yacht. How you planned to take everything I built and sell it to the highest bidder. The Russians exchanged glances. Mikhail's expression hardened. This is true. Business is business. Lorenzo snapped. Romano wanted out. He was abandoning the expansion into Eastern Europe. I was trying to salvage. You were trying to steal. Romano pulled out his phone, pressing play on a recorded conversation. Lorenzo's voice filled the restaurant, clear and damning. Romano's time is ending. Better to stand with the rising sun than the setting 1 inch. Mikhail's face went cold. We do not do business with men who betray their own blood. This shows poor character. Mikhail, wait. Lorenzo started forward, but Romano's guards blocked him. The deal is off, Mikhail said flatly. We seek partners with honor, not ambitious snakes, he nodded to Romano. You have our apologies for this. Misunderstanding. We were given incomplete information. I understand. No offense taken. Romano's voice carried the weight of old authority. Perhaps when my affairs are in order, we can discuss legitimate business opportunities. With proper transparency this time. Mikhail studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Perhaps, he gestured to his companions, and they walked calmly toward the exit, leaving Lorenzo standing alone, abandoned by his would-be allies. Lorenzo's face crumbled. 20 years of partnership, of brotherhood, ending in this public humiliation. Romano, please. We can fix this. We can. No, Romano's voice was final. You made your choice on that yacht. Now live with the consequences. Isabella watched from the corner, her heart still racing. Restaurant patrons filmed on their phones, staff members whispered behind their hands. This story would spread through the underworld like wildfire. Romano's guards moved in, securing Lorenzo's arms. Take him to the car, Romano ordered. Make sure he understands the terms of his retirement. As they dragged Lorenzo away, the man's eyes found Isabella. This is your fault, he hissed in Italian. You're the one who… Enough, Romano's voice cracked like a whip. She saved my life, which is more than you tried to do, brother. Then Lorenzo was gone, hauled through the kitchen exit, his protests fading into the night. The restaurant slowly returned to normalcy, patrons pretending they hadn't just witnessed a mafia power struggle. Romano approached Isabella, who was leaning against the wall, her legs finally giving out from exhaustion and shock. It's over, he said quietly. Is it? Isabella's voice shook. Lorenzo had allies. The silver-haired man is still out there. How many others want you dead? Fewer now than before. Word will spread about what happened here. About Lorenzo's betrayal and his failure. Romano helped her stand. In our world, loyalty is everything. He broke that code. No one will follow him now. And me? Am I safe? Romano was silent for a moment.
Come?
Let's talk outside. They walked to the cliff edge, where the restaurant's terrace overlooked the sea. The sun had set, leaving behind streaks of orange and purple. Below, waves crashed against ancient rocks. You need to disappear for a while, Romano said. I can arrange it. New identity, money. A fresh start somewhere far from here. Maybe America or Australia. Somewhere Lorenzo's reach can extend. You're sending me away. I'm giving you your life back. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. Inside is enough money to start over. Twice over. And a contact who specializes in making people vanish legally. Isabella stared at the envelope but didn't take it. What if I don't want to disappear? Isabella. What if I wanted to stay? Help you rebuild whatever needs rebuilding. Romano's expression softened. You're not meant for this world. You proved that by trying to save a man you barely knew. That kind of conscience? It gets you killed in my business. He pressed the envelope into her hands. Take the gift I'm offering. Live the life you deserve. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. What happens to you? I continue. Repair the damage Lorenzo caused. Eventually, I'll keep my promise to myself and retire for real. Maybe move to that villa in Tuscany I've been dreaming about, he smiled sadly. But that's my burden to carry, not yours. I'll never forget this. Good. Let it remind you how precious normal life is. Romano touched her cheek gently, a gesture almost fatherly.
Grazie, Isabella Garcia.
For everything. Then he turned and walked away, his guards falling into step beside him. Isabella watched him disappear into the darkness, the envelope heavy in her hands. Day 6, Seaside Promenade. The sunrise painted the ocean in shades of gold and pink. Isabella sat on a bench overlooking the water, her suitcase beside her. The hotel had accepted her resignation without question. She suspected Romano had made a generous donation to smooth things over. Her phone showed a bus ticket confirmation. The contact Romano provided had been efficient. New passport, new name, a job waiting in Vancouver. A complete life reset. Isabella opened her apron pocket, the same apron she'd worn that first day when Romano walked into the hotel, and found something she hadn't noticed before. Another envelope, smaller, with just 3 words written in elegant handwriting.
Grazie per la verità.
Thank you for the truth. Inside was her overdue salary from the hotel, plus exactly enough to cover her mother's medical bills, her rent, her car repairs. Not a euro more, not a euro less. Romano had calculated precisely what she needed to leave with no debts. No phone number. No way to contact him. Just a clean ending. Isabella tucked both envelopes into her bag and stood. The bus would arrive in 20 minutes. A new life waited. Safe, normal, far from danger. She took one last look at the Grand Oceana Hotel in the distance, its windows catching the morning light. Somewhere in this city, Romano was rebuilding his empire. Lorenzo was facing whatever justice men like Romano dispensed. The silver-haired man was hiding, knowing his betrayal had failed. And she was free. Isabella shouldered her bag and walked toward the bus stop, leaving behind the mystery, the danger, and the strange, brief alliance with the Mafia boss who'd shown her that, even in darkness, there could be unexpected honor. The story was over. Her new story was just beginning. Behind her, the waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore, keeping secrets the sea would never tell. The end.